Today, I'm going to be doing a redraft of the 2011 NBA draft. Last redraft video, I did the 2010 NBA draft, and while it was a really interesting one to do a redraft of, it really wasn't a really good draft class, and there wasn't a lot of superstar and star players that came out of that draft. But this one, on the other hand, is in my opinion one of the greatest of all time. We've got superstars in this draft who have put themselves pretty high on the all-time list even, and even some guys that still have really bright futures and can impact the game at a high level in this upcoming decade of basketball. And I've officially decided that this is going to be the start of the 2010s decade redraft. So I'm going to redraft until up about maybe 2016 or 2017, but basically do every draft from 2010 up to there. And then after that, maybe even do some more legendary ones that you guys want to see me do. So anyway, before we get into this redraft though, it turns out that 90% of you guys aren't subscribed to the channel. The channel's been doing great so far in the first 5 videos, but only 10% of you guys are subscribed. So if you're seeing this and you aren't subscribed, make sure you do that so you don't miss out on any new videos. Starting with the first overall pick in the 2011 redraft, the Cavs are selecting Kawhi Leonard. And in the real draft, Kawhi Leonard went 15th overall and then got traded on draft night for George Hill. But anyway, Kawhi has proven over his career that he's really gone down as one of the greatest of all time, and I actually think he's still underappreciated. It was a bit of a debate. There could have been some guys I could have put ahead of Kawhi, but because of his overall two-way game over his career, I definitely had to put him number 1. And Kawhi's putting together a really good resume for his all-time case as well. He's now won 2 finals MVPs with 2 different teams, which arguably could mean more than 2 regular season MVPs, since in those runs he played like literally the best player over the entire playoffs. He's also won a DPOY, and overall he's one of the greatest two-way players of all time, and he's going to go down as easily the best player in this draft. With the second overall pick, the Minnesota Timberwolves are selecting Klay Thompson, who in the real one went 11th, so he's also another steal. And it was a really hard decision between Klay and the guy that I put at 3rd overall in the redraft, but the reason I went with Klay is for a couple of reasons. And first of all, I think he's the greatest 3-and-D player of all time. He's definitely a top 3 shooter of all time, up there with Stephen Curry and Ray Allen. And he's shot about 40% for his career, but he's also shot incredibly tough shots over his career and is really just overall one of the greatest, if not the greatest, 3-point shooter ever. And you guys know how I do redrafts if you watched the last one. I do them as if the draft is happening today, so I like to look at the fit for each different player on the team today, and Klay would fit in perfectly with the Timberwolves. He would provide them much needed off-ball shooting and much needed defense. He'd be their best defender and be able to defend the perimeter better than almost anyone in the league. With the 3rd overall pick in the redraft, the Utah Jazz are selecting Kyrie Irving, who in this draft was the 1st overall pick, going to the Cavs in the real life. And you see why I put Kyrie here behind Klay. First of all, I just think Klay's a little bit higher on my all-time list, and with today's Minnesota Timberwolves, he would fit in much better. Now, over Kyrie's career, he's proven, at least in 2016, that he's a winning player and someone that's won a championship in his career with LeBron James. And he's one of the best ISO players of all time, and one of the best ball handlers, and one of the guys that can score at a very high level consistently. Now, with his fit on the Jazz here, he'd fit in pretty well and definitely make them a championship contender in my opinion. And he is dropping a little bit from 1 to 3 in the redraft, but we can definitely say that he did live up to the hype of being a number 1 overall pick. With the 4th overall pick in the redraft, again, the Cavaliers are selecting, and they're selecting Jimmy Butler, who in the real draft went 30th overall, so he's one of, if not the biggest steal of the draft. And this is funny because if this was actually a reality, and this redraft was happening now, with Kawhi Leonard and Jimmy Butler both going to the Cavs, it would take them from one of the worst teams in the league and one of the worst defensive teams to probably one of the best defensive teams, and probably a championship contender, honestly, with Jimmy and Kawhi. And Jimmy, again, is a guy that has consistently over his career affected the game on both ends of the floor. And if I was to base this redraft off of players right now, he'd probably be going 2nd overall, honestly. But he hasn't had the same impact of guys like Kyrie and Klay Thompson in the early years of his career, so he's going here at 4th overall. With the 5th overall pick in the redraft, my Toronto Raptors are going to be selecting Kemba Walker. And throughout his career, Kemba Walker's consistently been one of the best point guards in the league. And I wanted to put him up there with the big dogs like Jimmy Butler and Kawhi and all the other guys I put up there at the start of the redraft. But the reason I didn't is because he's a huge liability on defense and has been throughout his entire career. And in terms of his fit on the Raptors, he wouldn't fit in great because they already have 2 really good point guards, and he wouldn't really fit their defensive system either, but he's easily the best overall player, so they have to take him. With the 6th overall pick, the Washington Wizards are selecting Nikola Vucevic, who's another decent mid-round type of steal guy, going 16th overall in the real draft. And it was a big decision for me whether to take him with this pick for the Wizards or the guy that I have at number 7, which is a very interesting player, and you probably saw him in the thumbnail of the video. But Vucevic would fill a big hole for the Wizards as a big man who can impact the game on both ends of the floor in the paint, and also be a really good pick and pop man for whoever's running that with them. And also the reason I have Vucevic this high is because he's just been really consistent over his career. And especially now, I think he's an all-star caliber player. With the 7th pick, the Sacramento Kings are selecting Isaiah Thomas, who in the real draft was literally selected with the last overall pick, 60th overall. And this selection in the redraft reminds me of one like Jeremy Lin from the last video in the 2010 redraft, because just like Jeremy Lin, there was a section in his career for Isaiah Thomas when he was one of, if not the best player in the league. And in 2017, he was an MVP candidate for the Boston Celtics. But for the last few years, it's been so bad for him that he's literally been out of the league. And again, just like I said for Jeremy Lin, I just think this is a good overall ranking for Isaiah Thomas, and I think some people would even put him a little bit lower, but just because of those incredible years with the Boston Celtics, he has to go at least 7 for me. With the 8th overall pick, the Detroit Pistons are selecting Tobias Harris, who in the real draft went 19th overall. And throughout his career, there's been times where Tobias Harris looks like an all-star caliber player, which really just shows you how good this draft is. We're at 8th, and we still have players that have looked like all-star caliber players in their career. And really, the main strength of Tobias Harris's game is his ability to stretch the floor and shoot the 3. But over the last few years, especially this year, he's fallen off a little bit and definitely hasn't lived up to his max contract. In my opinion, though, throughout his career, he's still the best overall player to select here. With the 9th overall pick in the redraft, the Charlotte Hornets are selecting Bojan Bogdanovic, who in the real draft, he went 31st overall, so another steal. He was selected right after Jimmy Butler in the actual draft. And I considered putting him over Tobias Harris, and I actually think that right now in the NBA, he's a bit better than Tobias, but Harris has had the better overall career up to this point. But I can see Bogdanovic being a guy that potentially moves up this redraft as the years go by, because he's really hit his prime right now in the NBA and has a bright future. He's really a good overall scorer right now, and last year he averaged 20 points per game on very good 3-point shooting. He'd fit in well with the Hornets too, because they need some shooting. With the 10th overall pick in the redraft, the Milwaukee Bucks are selecting Jonas Valanciunas, who in the real draft he went 5th overall, and I can see the Bucks selecting him in this redraft because they kind of need a backup center. And Jonas, he's dropping a little bit from 5 to 10 in the redraft, but it's not that he's underperformed his NBA career, he just hasn't really shown all-star level potential, and is really more of a traditional big man, putting up consistent numbers throughout his career, but again, not being all-star caliber. And this is interesting because it really shows, again, how good this draft is, because if this was in the 2010 draft, he could probably go from anywhere to 5 to 7 in the redraft, but in this one, he's going at 10. With the 11th overall pick in the redraft, the Golden State Warriors are selecting Tristan Thompson. And this is a really similar situation to Valanciunas because in the redraft, Thompson went 4th overall, so he's dropping a little bit, but he hasn't necessarily underperformed. He just, again, hasn't shown all-star potential and is more of a traditional big man that's a role player. He ranks below Valanciunas here because he's just a little bit less productive, and again, he fits in well with the Warriors just because they need a backup center next to James Wiseman. With the 12th overall pick in the 2011 redraft, the Utah Jazz are selecting Davis Bertans, who in the real draft went 42nd overall. And last year, Davis Bertans really took a next step in his game, and if it wasn't for his breakout year last year, he might not even be making the lottery. But he showed last year that he's one of the most lethal sharpshooters in the NBA, and is definitely considered a huge steal in this draft. He can add value to any team with his shooting ability, and he has a bright future as well because he fits into the league perfectly, as I mentioned, and he's going to be doing this for years to come. With the 13th overall pick in the redraft, the Phoenix Suns are selecting Reggie Jackson, and he would come off the bench and be their backup point guard, and I really think Reggie Jackson's a pretty underrated player throughout his career. He's been a guy that consistently can come off the bench and provide consistent scoring and consistent playmaking, and especially over the last few years, he's been a really good role player, so that's why he's making the lottery here in this redraft. And to finish off the lottery, with the 14th overall pick in the redraft, the Rockets are selecting Markieff Morris, which they did in the real draft too with the same pick. For some reason, the exact same thing's happening that happened with Patrick Patterson last video if you watched that. Also, if you haven't watched that 2010 redraft already, it'll be linked down below in the description, so you can go check that out. Now, in terms of this pick for the redraft, Markieff Morris would add value to the Rockets because he can be a primary scorer if you need him to at any point. He's shown that he can do that with the Knicks last year when he was at his best. He can also spread the floor and be a pretty good defender. So now getting into some honorable mentions who just missed the cut for the lottery. The first one is Markieff Morris, who went 13th overall in the actual draft. I was very close to putting him in the lottery, but I think Marcus has just had the slightly better career out of the two brothers so far. Then we've got Nikola Mirotic, who went 23rd overall. He was very close as well. And Brandon Knight, who went 8th overall, who I wouldn't consider a bust. He's had a decent NBA career, and he almost made the lottery of the redraft. And now getting into some notables who missed the lottery. Yes, my favorite part of redrafts. These are the busts. So first of all, we have the 2nd overall pick, Derrick Williams. Yeah, that's right, not Darren Williams, the point guard who is really good at passing. Derrick Williams. You ever heard of him? Yeah, me neither. Then we've got the 3rd overall pick, Enes Kanter, who's had a decent NBA career, but I had to leave him out of the lottery because he's a big liability on defense, especially over the last few years. So I'd consider him a bust. And then the 6th overall pick, Vesley, who honestly I've never heard of as well. So there are your honorable mentions and the busts for this redraft. So there you have it. There's my redraft for this very good and accomplished 2011 NBA draft. Be sure to leave in the comments what you agree with my rankings and what you disagree with. Also leave in the comments who do you think is the biggest steal of this draft and who do you think is the biggest bust in this draft when we look back at it in 2020. As always, thank you all for watching the video today. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on any new videos, and I'll see you guys next video.